Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today. The topic for today's webinar is Batteries 101 Part 2, Benefits and Applications of Battery Energy Storage in Massachusetts. This webinar is being presented by Clean Energy Group and the Clean Energy States Alliance, and we're very excited to have some excellent guest speakers with us today. But before we pass it over to them, I'd like to go over some webinar logistics. If you'd like to minimize the webinar viewing panel, you can do so by clicking on the orange area you see circled here. You can also click on that to expand your webinar console. And one thing you might want to do on your console is to submit your questions and comments. We'll be saving 15 minutes following our presentation for a Q&A with the audience, and we will get to as many questions as we can. But to make sure that we get to your question, please type it in when you think of it and don't wait until the end. Finally, this webinar is being recorded. Slides and recording of today's webinar will be sent to you via email within 48 hours. And you can also find all of these materials on our website at cisa.org/webinars. This is where we post all of our upcoming and archive webinars, so it's a good one to know. And with that, I'd like to pass it over to our host for today's webinar, my colleague, Todd Olinsky-Paul.
Thanks, Zareen, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm going to do a brief introduction of the topic and the speakers, and then we will go right into the subject matter for today. In case you're not familiar with the organizations, Clean Energy Group and Clean Energy States Alliance, I'll give you just a very brief bit of information. Clean Energy Group and Clean Energy States Alliance are two related nonprofits. We're based in Vermont. We work across the country on clean energy programs, policy, project development, research, and so forth. Two organizations are very closely related. Clean Energy Group is mostly foundation funded and does a wide range of advocacy in the clean energy space. And Clean Energy States Alliance, the difference is that Clean Energy States Alliance is essentially a membership group for state energy agencies. And we are celebrating 20 years of Clean Energy States Alliance, working with states to help them develop and roll out and administer and improve their clean energy programs and policy. So here's a slide that has the logos of the members of Clean Energy States Alliance. As you can see, we have a lot of members, and they include Massachusetts, which is the subject and purpose of today's webinar, is to present energy storage information to and for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So today we have Dion, General Manager of Wakefield Municipal Light Department, one of many municipal utilities in Massachusetts. We have Tom Ferguson, Energy Storage Programs Manager from the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs and DOER. We have Jason Viadero, the Director of Engineering and Generation Assets at MWEC, which is the Massachusetts Municipal Wholesale Electric Company, which serves the municipal utilities of the state. And we have Chris Sherman, a Senior Vice President at Cogentrix Energy. Before I hand it over to our first speaker, I wanted to give you a little bit more information about this webinar, and I'm having trouble advancing the deck. Here we go. So this webinar is one of a series. It is brought to you, obviously, by Clean Energy States Alliance and Clean Energy Group in collaboration with three Massachusetts agencies: the Department of Energy Resources, or DOER, the Clean Energy Center, or MassCEC, and the Department of Environmental Protection, or MassDEP. And those three agencies have been working together since 2011 as the Clean Energy Results Program, or CERP. And so this is a collaborative webinar between CISA and CEG and these three agencies working together. Now, this is number 2 of a 4-part webinar series. Today, we are going to cover energy storage benefits and applications specific to Massachusetts, obviously. This will include fossil fuel peaker plant replacement, energy and environmental equity, grid benefits, and resilience. Yet to come are webinars 3 and 4 of the series. Webinar 3, which will probably take place in June, will be covering considerations for battery siting, including fire safety, environmental considerations, and security. And then webinar 4, which will be either June or July, will cover municipal considerations such as siting, permitting, planning, zoning, and municipal best practices. If you missed webinar 1 of the series, you can review it. It's posted at the CISA and CEG websites under our webinar archives, as are the slides. So you can actually view the recorded webinar, or you can take a look at the slides. I just wanted to note finally that this webinar series is for informational purposes only. It's not meant to be a platform for debate about state programs or policy, but more to provide information to people so that they can better understand energy storage, the technologies, the state's interest in storage, the state's policies and programs, and so forth. So we will answer as many questions as possible. We will prioritize the questions from Massachusetts and about Massachusetts specific topics. So if you are, for example, on the board of a municipal utility in Massachusetts, or you are a representative of a community group in Massachusetts that's interested in learning more about energy storage, you can feel free to indicate that when you type your question in. You don't have to, but you can. I do enter your questions as they occur to you. I will be going through those as the presentations are being made and pulling out the ones that seem to be most relevant and appropriate, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end. And again, the webinar is being recorded and it will be made available along with the slides on our website. Okay, I think that is it for me. I want to pass the microphone to Tom Ferguson of DOER, and presentations begin. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you very much, Todd. All right. So thanks to everybody for joining. Really excited for the presentations to come here from my colleagues. What I'm going to do in my presentation is basically kind of give a little bit of a recap of the last webinar, talk a little bit more about DOER's programs regarding energy storage, and present some recent results from a study that we published in January on the state of energy storage now to 2050 in the Commonwealth. So to start, why storage matters. It's been called the Swiss Army knife of the grid because it can provide so many different services. And this figure on the left from now a classic report from Rocky Mountain Institute shows, I think it's 13 different services that energy storage can provide. Anything from serving the grid at large. So for us in Massachusetts, we're all connected through ISO New England to all the other New England states. All the way down to a residential customer level. So energy storage can provide several grid stability services, and these grid stability services are served in the form of market products. This is shown in kind of green on the left. So different kinds of reserves, voltage support, black start, arbitrage, capacity. These are basically meant to keep supply and demand always in balance, essentially keep the lights on, because the grid, these services are required to kind of keep the grid stable. And because energy storage resources like batteries, which is kind of the main topic of this series of battery storage specifically, because they're dispatchable, meaning that the charging and discharging can be controlled very well, very fine. Unlike renewables, they're able to provide a very wide variety of services. Not only that, they're able to integrate renewable resources like solar and wind, which are intermittent. They can't be controlled in terms of their dispatch. And as we further decarbonize our grid, these products become ever more important, ever more valuable and critical to the Commonwealth meeting its decarbonization mandates. And just again, briefly to kind of touch on, beyond grid services, energy storage can also provide a variety of customer services, which we'll be hearing more about these, and I think in some of the next speakers, including kind of lowering electric bills, as well as providing backup power. Next slide. So energy storage in the Commonwealth really started in 2016 with the publication of the State of Charge Report, which establishes the many value propositions of energy storage. A few years after that, we established our first target for storage of 1,000 megawatt hours by 2025, the end of the next year. We have 3 kind of programs that incent energy storage. One's through our Smart Solar program, another is Connected Solutions, which is through Mass Save, and finally the Clean Peak Energy Standard. And just as I mentioned just earlier this year, we published a report kind of looking at kind of the current state of storage deployment, and as well as what roles new longer duration storage technologies could play in the Commonwealth. Next slide. So I just want to touch on a couple of our programs in a little more depth. So first is the SMART program. Again, this is our solar program. So it pays owners a fixed dollar per kWh incentive for energy being produced by their solar systems. And the way energy storage plays into this is if you have an eligible storage system added to your smart solar system, you can get an adder that boosts that dollar per kWh for the solar energy that you're producing specifically. And the value of that adder, there's a fairly complex formula used to kind of calculate the value of the adder, but suffice to say, essentially, it's designed to kind of provide more value to systems, energy storage systems with higher rated power and energy capacities, but it basically kind of levels off to a point. It doesn't just like keep further incentivizing more power and more duration. And it's estimated that about 400 megawatt hours of energy storage systems are participating through the smart storage adder. It's really been a key incentive for getting storage deployed to date in the Commonwealth. But unlike the next program I'll talk about, the Clean Peak Standard, smart storage adder is more focused on deployment and not operations. Next slide. What is focused on operating storage is the Clean Peak Energy Standard. So the overall objective with Clean Peak is to reduce the cost and emission impacts of peak demands through renewables, storage, and demand response. So it's not just energy storage that can participate in Clean Peak, renewables and demand response also can participate. But reasons being that the cost and emission impacts of peak demand, as found through state of charge, can be extremely high. So there's a lot of value in trying to incentivize, the deployment of clean energy resources to reduce peak demands. And the way it works is that the eligible resources basically that can dispatch during certain seasonal peak periods, which are shown below. Kind of these 4-hour windows in each of the 4 seasons. When you dispatch during those times, you generate Clean Peak energy certificates. And all of the retail electric suppliers in the Commonwealth have to annually purchase a certain number of Clean Peak certificates relative to the load that they serve. And that number increases every year. So we're, then trying to incentivize further cleaning the peak as time goes on. So essentially, this creates an obligation. This creates a market-based mechanism where the Clean Peak certificates have value. And that figure on the bottom right from State of Charge is this kind of very, simply kind of showing the value prop here of taking, storing, excess renewable energy, say solar that's produced during the day, and then using that later when you reach that peak period and the sun has gone down to shave the peak. Next slide. So there's lots of different multipliers that increase the number of certificates or could decrease the number of certificates that are produced in Clean Peak. And really what the multipliers are intended to do is to try to incentivize certain behaviors and deployments. So for example, reducing peak in summer and winter is much higher value proposition than it is in the spring and fall. So there's a 4 times multiplier for, doing so in the summer and winter seasons. Reducing the ISO wide, monthly peak is really valuable. So the peak for the entirety of the region. So if you're able to dispatch during that hour of the month every month, you get a 25 times multiplier. Resiliency gets a boost. There's a few here that are actually reduce the number of credits you get, and the reason for this is that these are kind of resources that are already deployed or are being incentivized through other programs, and we're trying to avoid overly incentivizing certain resources. So for example, with SMART, there's a 0.3x multiplier applied to the CPS because they're already getting incentivized through the SMART storage adder. So you can stack benefits, but there is going to be a discount on those clean peak credits there. And this last one here is kind of the most recent multiplier that we rolled out end of December. This is called the distribution circuit multiplier. And this gives a 2x, so very lucrative incentive applied to resources that interconnect to the distribution system, specifically on circuits in distribution company territories that have been identified as highly loaded, such that if energy storage can operate to kind of reduce the load on those circuits, it has the potential to kind of defer, utility upgrades and kind of provide value there to ratepayers. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think one more back. So just want to give you a quick snapshot of where we are in terms of uptake in the program. This is as of a couple months ago. We've got almost 400 systems total. This is combining energy storage, demand response, and RPS resources, equating to a capacity of nearly 280 megawatts. For energy storage, it's largely been kind of these 5 megawatt or less batteries that are paired with solar through the SMART program. RPS resources, we have a few, PV onshore wind, anaerobic digesters. Demand response, to date, it's mainly been building load curtailment, but as of late, we've started to see some innovative system aggregators bring in aggregations of EV chargers and smart thermostats that are able to kind of qualify and participate. Next slide. So this is a very key year for the CPS. We have an obligation to review the program every 4 years, and this is our first review of the program since it was rolled out in 2020. So just to reiterate, overall the goal here is to drive more participation in Clean Peak, both by existing and new CPS resources, and to lower the amount of alternative compliance payments that we're collecting. So just to kind of explain what is meant by all that. So there's this obligation that I talked about earlier for the retail suppliers. But when the market is undersupplied, in other words, there aren't enough CPECs being produced for the electric suppliers to meet the minimum standard obligation, this doesn't kind of, obviate their obligation. That difference has to be made up through what are called alternative compliance payments. And so DOER ends up collecting this ACP, and we use it to create programs to drive more storage deployment, particularly in CPS, and the idea being hopefully to help lower the ACP collections that we're having in future years. So it's great that we can use this money to make programs, but from building programs, getting enrollment takes time. So kind of the benefit there is more delayed in comparison to, had the market have enough CPECs, for, the electric suppliers to meet their obligation, without having to pay ACP. There's more of an immediate ratepayer benefit to that. So we're trying to use this money to kind of spur more deployment and participation in the program. And at this point, we are in an undersupply condition in a CPS. So this is very much kind of a focus of ours during the review is what can we do to help spur more deployment? So the things that we can look at are the CPEC multipliers, the minimum standard, the ACP rate. I talked about some of these things in the previous webinars, but these three are essentially kind of the heart and soul of CPS. And after we get stakeholder feedback, we can modify these things. So some key considerations here, ultimately we want to make sure that, the program is being effective in terms of reducing costs and emissions associated with peak demands. That's what Clean Peak is all about. And we want to, again, make sure that we're incentivizing the deployment of Clean Peak resources, particularly energy storage systems. And we did just close a period for public comment on the CPS program review. This was closed on May 3rd, and we're currently reviewing stakeholder feedback. Next slide. So just wanted to present a few results that we got on our recent energy storage study, Charging Forward. We worked with Mass CEC, and the analyses were led by consulting firm E3. And it looked at kind of three very broad questions. One, today, what is the current state of energy storage deployment in the Commonwealth? Kind of cost benefits of current use cases, barriers that still exist. Second, what are the potential applications of mid and long duration storage, particularly contributing to reliability in a decarbonized system. And finally, kind of looking at the market outlook for various kinds of mid and long duration storage technologies, electrochemical, chemical, thermal, et cetera. Just like what is kind of the technological landscape today? Next slide. So Sarah kind of presented some of these results, Sarah from SCEC, Sarah Cullinan. I want to kind of just point out a few things in these next couple of slides and some of the cost benefit analyses for storage that were done. First is for looking at kind of the benefits and the costs relative to a standalone transmission connected energy storage system. So here, this was modeled as a 50 megawatt, 4-hour duration lithium-ion battery. So in this modeling, it's basically a levelized cost from 2022, like assuming about a 20-year project lifetime. And we do find that, overall, the benefits do outweigh the costs. But, we've kind of yet to see kind of the realization of these, systems being deployed. And I think, the big reason that we kind of heard from stakeholders is that there's essentially a lack of long-term certainty in CPS in terms of like how the value of those credits will trend over time. It's a challenge to get projects financed because of this perceived uncertainty. And I would say this is going to be a big focus of ours going forward because, as you can see in the figure on the left, the Clean Peak credits make up a very substantial portion of the value stack. So if, if a system can't kind of essentially access that chunk, and it can't be accessed because the project doesn't get financed, doesn't get built, these projects, can't get financed, can't get built. But overall, the hope here is that over time, this is the figure on the right, that the need for incentives should decline substantially, and you can kind of see this in terms of the shrinking dark blue bar of Clean Peak relative to the increasing pink bar for wholesale energy. So as capacity becomes much more valuable as we're electrifying everything in the Commonwealth and throughout New England, and arbitrage becomes a much bigger opportunity with more intermittent renewable energy, wholesale market opportunities should be much better. Next slide. And then looking a little bit at distribution, unlike transmission on the left, a standalone distribution connected asset was modeled to not have benefits outweigh costs. I will say that this didn't account for a few things that could change the story here. One is a tariff that's kind of going to be filed in FERC by the electric distribution companies in the state. That would kind of govern how energy storage pays for charging energy. That could, really help, save costs as compared to the current tariff and encourage more wholesale market participation by these assets, as well as the distribution circuit multiplier, which is not included in this analysis, could really bump up that dark blue Clean Peak credit bar. In contrast with a smart solar plus storage system, this is just modeling the storage piece of smart. Benefits do outweigh costs for these systems, and you can see this is really driven by the lucrative incentive provided by the smart storage adder. Next slide. Resiliency, this can be huge. I think we're going to hear more about this in the subsequent presentation today. But resiliency can make up a huge part of the value stack for storage, particularly for critical facilities. And I realize I'm probably going a little long here, so suffice to say that we're very interested in creating programs to kind of help fund resiliency-based deployments for critical facilities, particularly for low to moderate income and environmental justice communities. Next slide. Quickly here, this is basically just showing how the grid is going to be changing as we decarbonize, and the role of energy storage will also be changing, and the need for mid and long duration storage will crop up over time. So today, basically the use case for storage is sort of this daily peak shifting that we kind of talked about, like as being incentivized through the Clean Peak program, and we're a summer peaking system, meaning that our peak loads are in the summer. Whereas as we decarbonize, go to 2050, lots of heat pumps, EVs, you can see in the purple on the bottom that storage is needed to be discharged for several days on end, which brings up the need for technologies that go beyond the lithium ions duration, which not sure what it will tap out at, but probably 10 hours. Won't be able to do multi-day storage, so we'll need something else for that. And we also move from a summer peaking system to a winter peaking system. Next slide. Diversity benefits. This is sort of an interesting thing where essentially if you kind of combine a resource like offshore wind, which is a huge part of our decarbonization roadmap, with long duration energy storage, the individual capacity values of the two resources end up essentially, when you combine them, their combined capacity value is larger than the sum of its parts. And this is basically because the way offshore wind profile allows energy storage to kind of fill the gap and essentially discharge to a greater depth than if they were separately operated. And you get this extra little boost. And this effective diversity benefit gets better the more storage and renewables you deploy. Next slide. So in conclusion, we have some $50 million in program funding, and we're going to be developing programs that are targeted towards specific use cases of storage and help lower commercialization barriers for mid long duration technologies that we're going to need. We're aggressively looking into procurements, creating refined targets that tie energy storage deployment to renewable deployments, looking at our existing programs, and as always, continue our stakeholder collaboration on other issues like interconnection and rate design for energy storage. With that, I will pass it to Jason. Thanks so much.
Actually, Tom, I'm going to ask you to stay on for a moment. We have a couple of questions specifically about your presentation.
Okay.
So since we have your slide deck here, I thought it would be a good idea to look at those for a moment before we move on. So on slide 9, the question is on the cost benefit slide, I guess slide 9, why is the connected solutions revenue not included in the revenue stack?
This is slide 9. So these are for transmission connected assets, connected, which are front of the meter, whereas connected solutions is a behind the meter program. So we ran several different cost benefit analyses, like 5 different kind of classic use cases of storage today. And I don't think I presented any behind the meter assets in this presentation, but Sarah did in our previous one. And in those for the behind the meter applications, you will see the kind of connected solutions benefit reflected in those stacks.
Great. And then we have a question from a municipal light commissioner from Massachusetts. The question is, are MLPs required to purchase CPECs or Clean Peak credits? The slide says all retail electricity suppliers.
Yeah, it's a good point of clarification. Yeah, this is it's specifically for those in the electric distribution company territories. So Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil. Municipal light plants don't participate in the Clean Peak program.
Great. And then somebody wants to know where we get a map for the 2x multiplier. I'm assuming this refers to the multiplier for distribution loaded circuits.
We don't have a map. That's a great suggestion. But if you go on to the Clean Peak website, DOE's website, there is a section there for the distribution circuit multiplier that will show kind of the latest list of circuits. And so you can basically, it's not in map form, but you can kind of see all of the eligible circuits for this year.
Okay, great. And finally, somebody wants to know, what does CPS stand for? That's Clean Peak Standard, I assume.
Clean Peak Energy Standard, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I'm
Let's
not
go
sure
ahead
why
and
they
move
use that
on.
there, but yeah.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and move. So CPS and CPES are the same, referring to the same program in Tom's slides. Let's go ahead and go to Jason, and we will, if you did have other questions about Tom's presentation, we'll get to those at the end.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Todd. So I was going to present, a single potential use case in an area where municipal utilities have been utilizing energy storage for quite a few years. Again, introducing myself, I'm Jason Viadero. I'm the Director of Engineering for the Massachusetts Municipal Wholesale Electric Company. While Tom mentioned Unitil, National Grid, and Eversource are the large distribution utilities for Massachusetts, about 10% of Massachusetts residents are served by a municipal utility. There's over 40 throughout the state, and what works directly with them. So we're going to go over a specific use case that's proven very beneficial. We see a high potential for benefit going forward. So next slide, please. And just as a precursor, and something as a history lesson I always find interesting, grid scale energy storage is not something new. The first real energy storage project was based in New Milford, Connecticut, as pump storage that was constructed back in the 1930s. So we always almost 100 years in New England of energy storage utilization. How we use energy storage, the technologies associated with that have changed fundamentally. No longer is it pump storage. It's lithium ion. It's the predominant storage mechanism out there now. And as opposed to providing just essentially energy arbitrage and grid shifting services as had been done for decades before, now there's ample benefit for storage to play a role in many different areas of the grid going forward. So next slide, please. So what I'm going to talk about is essentially behind the meter energy storage. And when I say behind the meter, I don't necessarily mean behind the customer meter. I mean behind the utility customer meter. Again, Mass Municipal Wholesale Electric, we work with the municipal utilities. Our meter essentially is the point of interconnection with the transmission service. So in New England, working in the ISO New England, energy is generated by a multitude of resources throughout the New England area. Energy is moved on the high voltage transmission system, and then basically delivered to municipal utilities or delivered to distribution utilities through essentially a distribution meter. This is our meter. That's what we're talking about. It's not necessarily a utility customer's meter per se. What we're looking at from our use case is really, how can we limit the amount of energy that we are drawing from the transmission system, from the bulk electric system during certain peak periods of the day, as Tom kind of alluded to previously. And in so doing, how can we drive down the cost of wholesale energy to the utility customers of these municipal utilities? Like Tom said, going all the way back to 2016 with the State of Charge report, the state recognized very early on that those peak hours, those peaks in the day, despite being very few and far between, I think it was less than 10% of the total hours in the year, represented over 50% of the wholesale cost, which is significant. So really, through effective utilization of energy storage and really trying to flatten those peaks and balance out the curve, we're able to deliver significant reductions in cost to our utility customers. Next slide, please. And again, I think for those of you who are not new to this, this concept is fairly straightforward, but for some of those who are not aware, energy usage is not uniform throughout the course of the day. Generally, demand drops off overnight as people go home, turn off appliances, businesses shut down. We tend to see our lowest period of demand there. Demand ramps up in the early morning hours. We have a fair amount of distributed solar throughout the Commonwealth as a result of some of the SREC and SMART programs that the states put forward. So we see a dip in midday, but then as utilization ramps up in the evening as solar begins to die off. We peak generally in the afternoon and generally, from a grid scale standpoint, peaking holistically in the summertime. But again, from those peak hours, so what we're talking about is essentially, one yearly capacity peak and, one monthly transmission peak, so essentially 13 hours per year. More than 50% of all municipal utilities wholesale power costs are driven by those 13 hours a year. So by effectively shifting, power, storing it from low use periods, be it overnight or midday, and then, displacing the power we would otherwise be drawing from the transmission system in those peak hours, we're able to deliver significant amounts of savings to our municipal light plants and their customers. Next slide, please. And kind of taking a step back, how do utilities deploy storage at this point? Going all the way back to 2016 with the State of Charge report, and then, through the efforts of DOER, as well as Clean Energy States Alliance, we can trace really kind of the municipal deployment all the way back to a system, installed in Sterling back then, which was, generally the first lithium-ion energy storage system, grid connected and deployed within New England back then. We knew that, peak costs, be it from a transmission side or capacity side, were significant. But again, the technology was very much in its infancy, and there hadn't been a whole lot of cases out there. People were generally concerned about, is this going to work? Can we really use energy storage to shift load like that? But through the forethought and through programs, administered by the state, the federal government, and entities like Clean Energy States, we were able to get Sterling in the ground, and then utilizing ACES funding again from the Mass Clean Energy Center 2 years later, we deployed projects in Wakefield, Ashburnham, and then Templeton. These projects were initially heavily incentivized, to the tune of 50% or 25% through state grants. But that, got the technology off the ground, and that, really, proved that these systems can work. They can effectively, move energies for 2 hours or 4 hours a day. And once the technology had proven itself out and costs began to decline on these energy storage systems, we've been off to the races. And really, behind the meter utility deployments of energy storage municipal utilities, it's something that it's a very unique case, but it's one that doesn't require any incentivization. Like Todd mentioned previously, while the investor-owned utilities are under the Clean Peak standard, municipal utility systems aren't necessarily bound by the Clean Peak standard, but similarly, these projects don't generate Clean Peak RECs because they're cited in municipal territories. So that the benefit is this is one specific use case that completely stands on its own economically. There's no state incentivization. In municipal utilities are tax exempt, so we're not necessarily claiming any type of tax credits, a PTC and ITC on this at all. It's, again, strictly using this for transmission load reduction, capacity load reduction, and a small amount of energy arbitrage. These systems are able to pay for themselves, throughout the useful life of the system, and then deliver significant benefit back to their host utilities. Next slide, please. So again, I've talked about it from an economic standpoint, but then also kind of looking out into the future holistically, why this is going to matter much more. Again, from an economic standpoint, we use this to minimize our peak, because again, transmission charges are continuing to grow, capacity charges are what they are, relatively stable, but are expected to grow as we look to bring on more generation. We look at the grid now, and these are figures from the ISO New England's 2050 transmission studies, looking at what the grid peak is. Currently looking at 2035, we see a fundamental shift, generally with electrification and where it's at in New England, kind of in the infant stages. We're not seeing a whole lot of, impacts, certainly some impacts from transportation, some impacts from heating and cooling as folks, look to transition to all electric vehicles and all electric home heating and cooling to really help decarbonize those sectors of the economy. We see this changing exponentially, though, as we move out to 2040, 2050, and so on. What that's going to mean is again, all the transportation load, all the home heating load, which is currently being served by fossil fuel, is going to electric, which is going to mean essentially the peak load of all of New England is going to more than double. So with that much more energy demand, with that much more load on the peak, anything we can do to try to flatten that peak, shave that peak, minimize that, is going to pay significant benefits to us, at least on the utility side, on the distribution end, as well as minimizing some of the massive infrastructure projects that are going to have to happen on the transmission side as well as the generation side to really meet that, electrical demand. Next slide, please. And then just to kind of illustrate this, again, this is coming from the ISO's 2050 transmission study. Again, as we transition to a decarbonized future, a clean energy future, our sources of energy are changing. I think you folks are well aware, that there's the expectation that a significant amount of this power is going to come from offshore wind resources, other resources. The problem now becomes, rather than fossil fuel generation plants, which are, scattered throughout the state and throughout New England, we now have new generation sources that are going to have new transmission to deliver this clean energy to the different load centers throughout New England. So be that Boston, Worcester, Springfield, and Massachusetts, Connecticut, Providence, other significant areas. That's going to be billions of dollars per year to build out that transmission infrastructure or to, rebuild and upsize the existing transmission infrastructure to accommodate that. What we see here essentially is, ISO did a forecast and said, okay, if we're able to effectively manage our peaks and try to shade that, resulting in only a 51, gigawatt peak in 2050, we're going to be needing to spend, 6.2 billion a year to 6.5 billion a year to be able to manage that. Left unmanaged, the forecasting of 57 gigawatt peak in 2050, which is going to, mean, essentially $1 billion per year additional transmission spend to build up the infrastructure to do that. So here, just kind of looking at dollars and cents, if we can effectively manage our peak, not only, through these, but through other programs, like Connected Solutions, like some of the incentive programs that, Tom had mentioned previously, we're going to be saving the grid as a whole billions of dollars over the next 25 plus years, because again, we don't necessarily need to overbuild the transmission infrastructure and our grid to accommodate the move towards electrification. So that's, again, peak management is something that we believe very strongly in, and we see, both economically and then also just, for helping us get to 2050 is something that's going to be critical. Next slide, please. And I guess, lastly, I'll just kind of, talk about what MWEC's plans are for the future and then segue into our next speaker, which is Peter Dion. MWEC is continuing to work on the deployment of energy storage. Currently, we're working with 10 municipal utilities across the Commonwealth to deploy another 50 megawatts of 4-hour energy storage in the next 2 years. Again, our focus is, primarily on peak load reduction with a longer duration storage. Some of the initial projects that were installed back in Sterling, Wakefield, Ashburnham, Templeton in the 2016 to 2018 were really 2-hour duration storage. We're seeing, now that the peaks are starting to flatten out more, there's more of a benefit to shifting, additional energy from off-peak hours to on-peak hours. So we're now deploying 4-hour systems. Additionally, again, because some of the technology has been proven out and the ability for storage projects to microgrid, we're seeing 2 projects now going in, one of which you're going to hear about next, which are combining the benefits of energy storage with, automatic microgridding and resilient backups to school, which again is something that's kind of hard to monetize because, how do you place a dollar value on resiliency? But it's again, kind of going to Tom's point that energy storage is a real Swiss Army knife. And, if you can find ways to value stack this, it just continues to add to the financial benefit and use case. And like I said before, our continued focus is on peak load management to really try to minimize and manage the impacts of electrification. And we're doing this concurrently, not only from a fixed asset standpoint, like Connected Solutions on the distribution utility side. The municipal utilities have a program called Net Zero, which again is focusing on how can we use smart devices, smart thermostats, home energy storage systems, other tools in the toolbox, EV charger curtailment, to really minimize that peak and deliver savings not only to the utility but also to the customers. So with that, I think if there's nothing else, I'll turn it over to Pete to talk about the energy park that's currently going in Wakefield.
Great, thank you, Jason. I think she's going to bring up my slides. Just by way of background, while the slides are coming up, Wakefield Gas and Light is a municipal electric department, obviously in Wakefield, Mass. We serve about 13,500 electric customers, of which about 7,000 are also gas customers. As Jason said, I think I can advance my slides, but if not, the slide advancement isn't going. But if you want to advance the slide. as Jason said, we were one of the first adopters with a few of the other munis to a battery project back in, I think it was 2018. And that battery, as I go through this project that we've developed, is actually going to be tied into that project as well in a backup mechanism. So if you want to advance the slide, that'd be great. So the energy park became a concept. We're a little bit unique here in Wakefield in that we have two schools that are located basically on the same street. The Northeast Regional Metro Tech High School and Wakefield High School are both actually on the same side street off of a main road in Wakefield. And they're both part of the Mass State School Building Project, and they are part of a program to obviously rebuild both high schools in a very close time frame. The tech was out of the gate first, and they ran into a few siting issues. So now actually both these projects are going on at the same time. But the concept was basically, we started working with the tech first because they were the first ones out of the gate. And they were also a little bit down the path when we began to work with them. But the reality was the tech wanted to have gas heating, and the driver of costs on our the gas side of our business is that gas peak day. Much like electric, the gas peak costs a lot in terms of our overall gas cost to customers. So we really didn't want to add any new gas load, especially on heating and cooling on the peak. So we approached Northeast Tech about going all electric for heating and cooling. Unfortunately, with budget constraints that they had, obviously, we needed to come up with a creative way to make that project work. And as a few people have said already, it is a little bit of the Swiss Army knife. We really worked hard to come up with a project that made sense in a number of different ways. And so therefore, what we came up with was this energy park. And I'll show a slide in a few minutes about where it's physically located. But basically what we tried to do was create a project that had both schools go all electric heating and cooling, not add to our gas load. From the outset, most of these schools have to be solar ready, but we wanted to have solar on both schools right from the start because it would tie into the energy park for one, it would reduce their overall operating costs for two. And as Jason said, that second battery project that he was talking about with 10 munis, we're one of those. So the energy park basically is a unique concept where it's a microgrid. We can actually separate from the system and run both schools. It's going to have a 5 megawatt, 20 megawatt hour battery storage unit, as Jason said. Part of that group purchase that that several of other MWEC members are making. We are going to have a single natural gas fired generator as backup, and I'll explain a little bit more about how that'll be used. But the entire switchgear is being built to operate as a microgrid. So if there's an extended loss of power, both schools can be used for various support purposes. The new high school itself is going to be a heating and cooling center in emergency situations. And again, we rarely have extended outages, but if we do, we have a mechanism to use it. The battery, with the help of the generators, the way we created the concept was that we needed to generate savings for both schools to make this project worth it. So the savings comes in two forms. We reduce capital costs by eliminating the need for backup generators at both schools. Typically, at schools of these size, we need a 500 to 1,000 kW generator, and at a cost of roughly $1.2 million. They would both be most likely diesel operated. So what we did is we decided that the best way to handle this would be to site a battery in between the two that could serve the emergency load of both schools. And instead of putting a generator at both schools, we're putting a transformer that's fed directly off that battery. If there's an extended outage, that's when the generator would kick in to recharge the batteries. The battery project, you'll see, has several different cells, so we can continuously move how we charge those batteries off the generator in an extended period of outage. The payback for the ratepayers comes in the form of the way we structured the solar portion of the deal is that solar will be installed immediately on both roofs. The schools will get the output of the solar for their own use, and MLD will get any excess, and there's no transfer of money in that. But the reality is, with 2 schools, the solar, will be beneficial to us in the summer because they won't obviously be used as much in the summer as they will in the winter. So those savings, in addition to running the battery on peak, as Jason talked about, when we try to hit the 12 transmission peaks and the capacity peak for the year, that translates into significant savings for our ratepayers in the behind the meter form. If you want to advance one slide. From a climate perspective, the chart on the left shows what the carbon output would have been if they had gone to gas heating. And obviously you can see a significant contribution from the natural gas usage. On the right-hand side, obviously that's much less in terms of carbon emission. And the blue line represents some gas attributed to having to use the generator at different points, and they do also have gas for labs and for heating and cooling in that school, but that's it. So in terms of the environmental output, and we have taken a significant step. Also, it's important to remember that as we move towards the 2050 goal of all electricity being non-carbon emitting or net zero, that yellow chart on the right will obviously diminish significantly over time. In Wakefield, we're already 53% non-carbon emitting, and obviously we're ahead of our 2030 goal with, and we all have the shared 2050 goal. If you want to advance one slide. All right, so getting back to the physical location. On the left side is the Wakefield High School. These are the existing schools right now. The new Wakefield High School is already underway, and it's basically being built where that football field and red track are immediately behind the existing school. So the new high school is going there. Just down the street, as you can see, the Northeast Metro Tech is already the existing school. Their replacement school is going across the street, and that is underway also. So we have 2 obviously major construction projects, both slated to end late 26, beginning of 27. And so this presented a unique opportunity for us to create the energy park. We're actually siting the energy park between the 2 schools. And obviously it presents an opportunity to do a lot of different things. The battery, the capital cost savings and the operating cost savings to both schools. If you can go ahead. This is just an electrical one line. You'll probably see it better if we share the slides later on. But basically, we're gonna have an emergency bus. When we discharge the battery, we'll only be reducing it to a minimum level that would still provide the emergency requirements of both schools. So it does impact our economics a little bit, but we've already done calculations for both schools to understand that the charge level that we need to keep the batteries at to handle the immediate load requirements of the schools in an emergency situation. A couple other items on this, and it might be hard to see, but the schools are located between our 2 major substations, so we actually have lines coming to the site in both directions, and that will enable us to obviously improve reliability to that school. And one more point about that, if you can see on the bottom left, it talks about BB substation. That battery that Jason showed a minute ago that we already have that was installed in 2018 exists at that station. So we've also built capability in this design so that if we have the battery at the energy park out of service for maintenance or repair, the battery at BB can be switched to back that battery up as well. Again, this was a very creative and multi-layered project. Our team's been working on it since 2021, but there's been a lot of thought put into all the benefits that we can derive out of it for all the different constituencies. So this has been kind of a unique project in that regard. Next slide. Obviously, as we talked about, one of the benefits is to operate in a microgrid form with multiple backups, including lines from both of our substations, which are fed off of different transmission lines. In addition, if we do have a long-term loss of supply, the microgrid will sense that. We will have the battery, obviously, as the first response to the loads at both buildings. And depending on the situation, the generator would be used to back that up. Once the utility feeder is restored and kept in place for a period of time, the system will automatically switch back to normal operation. You can go ahead. We have already received one grant from the American Public Power Association to develop an educational project, and it's actually already started. We've been in the schools this year already, in both schools, and it wasn't just the tech school where they're going to talk a little bit about more hands-on applications, but also in the high school in terms of not only hands-on, but also some of the theory in the AP classes. We've already spoken at the schools and shared a lot of information. So we're developing a curriculum that can be supported at both schools for various different classes, and again, both technical hands-on classes as well as electrical theory classes. Obviously, the greater interest we have in this type of project, the better. We have been exploring different funding opportunities, but the educational grant that we already received from APPA is already being put to use. Next slide. WMGLD will manage the batteries, the rooftop solar. Again, we'll own and operate both of those. They'll exist on their roofs. The benefit for them is obviously they're going to get the output when needed. We'll get any excess that will flow back to the energy park and partially be used for charging of the batteries. And they'll be built with solar right from the start, as they said, as opposed to being solar ready. The other thing that we factored into this, and we're providing EV chargers. We're providing 10 EV charger locations for both, one for each school, to again further provide for beneficial electrification. We're going to provide level 2 chargers, and the schools themselves are installing level 3 chargers. So there's a bunch of different benefits and a lot of thought that's gone into both sides of this project. Next slide. This is just a layout of that energy park. That little red circle you saw on the prior slide, this is what it'll look like behind the gate. The generator at the top, the batteries in modular form as part of the project that Jason's been working on with us. And again, ours is slated to, there's I think 3 or 4 that are going to be installed this year. Some are very close, I believe. Ours will be in before next summer from the battery power. We've started the project. Our road is cut in. We're doing site work right now, and we anticipate that we'll have the switch gear and the battery in place by next summer. The generator is the longest lead time item, and that will tie into the commissioning of both schools by the time they're ready to go in late 26, early 27. Next slide. So the benefits of the energy park, obviously I've talked a little bit about them. From a capacity management standpoint, there's a benefit to the ratepayers. We estimate a savings of approximately $1 million a year in capacity and transmission charges. Obviously, it promotes the long-term goal of getting us to net zero by 2050. From the school projects perspective, we were able to save each project about $1.2 million in costs for those 2 diesel generators that we've been able to eliminate. We reduced, obviously, the operating costs for both schools with the solar being in place right from day one. The educational opportunities that I talked about, and then the chargers. I don't know if there's another slide or not. Oh, just the timeline. Yeah, so as we said, at the end of 21, we began talking about this project. I would say that the project teams for both schools have been very, very cooperative and easy to work with. Even the tech school, which was a little bit further down the path when we started to work together and had to kind of pivot from a gas heating system to all electric, they shared with us their concerns and their needs, and we were able to develop this project, which provided both capital savings to them, but also the long-term benefit to us. So we're basically expecting delivery of the major systems next year, and the tech now I think is looking for permanent service in January of 26, and the high school in the fall of 27. But these are all kind of, these dates have floated a little bit. Actually, like as I said at the beginning, Wakefield High School is actually probably a little bit ahead of their original schedule, and the tech is a little bit behind. So if you ever come to Wakefield, you might want to avoid Hemlock Road in a busy day because there's a lot going on up there. With that, I don't know if there were any questions. I saw a few.
Peter, we do have a few questions specific to your slides. So people have been asking, what's the CapEx for the projects? What's the total cost savings numbers? And what are you spending annually per kilowatt hour for maintaining the batteries?
So the battery system that we're working with is a shared savings project. The project that Jason talked about, it's one of those 10, and we have a shared savings project with the vendor. All 10 of us do. So our capital outlay for that is very low. It's basically a shared savings project with them. The solar on both sets of roofs is a long-term lease, and then the only capital outlay is for the generator itself and the switchgear. So from a capital perspective, that's the outlay, and the projected energy savings, I think it was on one of the slides, of about $1 million a year. So we anticipate beneficial payback on this. And I'm not sure what the other question was again.
There was a question about the annual maintenance cost per kilowatt hour.
I don't have it at that basis. I know we have a generator maintenance contract with the vendor, and I forget what the number is. I could look that up and provide it later. So in Wakefield, in addition to the battery that we currently have up at our BB substation that Jason showed in his presentation, we also have 2 generators at our other substation. They're both Milton Cat, and we will be adding this to our overall maintenance contract with Milton Cat. We do have a fast response portion of that contract, obviously, because we don't want to miss capacity peaks. And in the case of the energy park, we also there's even more reliability needs as well. So the incremental cost of the maintenance of the generator has not been finalized yet, but that'll be factored into our overall maintenance cost.
Okay, just a couple more things. Somebody's asking whether the battery and or the generator at the energy park can be used to power either substation in an emergency.
They will flow back out to the system. So yes, because they're interconnected, and again, because we will use it as a capacity resource, it doesn't just stay inside the gate, it flows back onto the system. And so we can provide battery backup. Actually, the way if you got back to the one line, we have a battery at our BB substation, but not our Wallace substation. But we're gonna have a direct line from the energy park back to the Wallace substation from the battery that's at the energy park. So that's a unique added feature in this design. But both the generator and the battery will flow back overall to the system.
Great. And the last thing we can get to at the moment is somebody's asking, how is fire safety incorporated into the project?
Right now, the size of the energy park is enabling us to keep the batteries far enough away from the other equipment. And obviously, you know, I think you're probably going to talk about it in your next webinar. We're working closely with our fire department on fire prevention and actions at both battery sections. One of the issues we do have at our existing battery installation, it is based on current standards a little bit too close to our switchgear building. So we're actually putting up a firewall as we speak to insulate the battery from the rest of our equipment at that substation. In this case, we were able to design it so that it's adequately separated from the generator and the switchgear to avoid, you know, issues if there were a fire.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter. We're going to have to move on. There are a few other questions about your project, so we'll get back to those as best we can at the end, but I want to make sure other speakers have time. So,
sure. I'll turn it over to Chris Sherman with another use case.
Do we have Chris's slides?
Oh,
Thank you.
yep, there we go. All right, can everybody hear and see me?
Yep, sound good.
Okay, great. So my name's Chris Sherman. I'm with Cogentrix. I'll give you a little bit of a background about our company and how we exist within the regulatory construct of the energy suppliers. A little background on the site and the project that we're looking to develop, and then just some of the specifics and how we're distinct from some of the other folks that have been presenting. First and foremost, Cogentrix is an independent power producer. We're largely historically technologically agnostic. So they've constructed and managed all sorts of resources, thermal and renewable resources. You know, right now we have a fleet of 13 predominantly natural gas fired facilities. And as the regulation and public policies have evolved, we've begun to look at those facilities from the perspective of commercializing clean energy resources for the benefit of the market and the benefit of the assets. So I started in a regulatory role. So I was very outward facing and dealt fairly exclusively with public policy and regulations. And obviously, you know, everything's pointing in the direction of the energy transition. So as a company and personally, we wanted to lean into that. And so we looked at all 13 sites. We cataloged the available sites, the available infrastructure on the site, and then looked at the specific regional and state policy. And then kind of came up with an inventory of where the opportunities lie. And the West Springfield station presented itself as a very interesting opportunity. It was an end-of-life facility. It's about an 80-year-old facility, started in '49. It retired in 2022. You know, in the strictest sense of the word, this thing's been transitioning since 1957 as the load profile has changed and as more efficient technologies continued to be developed. But at the end, as of 2022, it was a natural gas peaking facility that had a very low capacity factor. There wasn't tremendous benefit to the grid, and so they made the decision to retire it. Now, this is obviously, like a lot of existing incumbent generator sites, it's a very complicated site. I want to make sure I didn't jump too far. There we go. So we broke the site up and we kind of looked at all of the opportunities that we would have given the limitations and the benefits of the site. So some of it from its origins of a coal facility, there was a capped coal ash landfill, and that's not something that you can put storage on because of the civil demands, the weight of the individual containers, but it is really good for solar. So we're proposing ultimately to put a solar battery facility to comply with the SMART program. And then, where you see that number 2, the Eversource substation, that's a really important component, and there's a tremendous incumbent advantage to having that on site from a couple of perspectives. When this facility was operating, it was multiple trains over the years, multiple combustion turbines technologies over the years, but there were 3 interconnects, and there are 2 existing transformers on site. And by reusing those, not only did we have an immediate access, of course, to the interconnection facilities, but there were challenges within the supply chain, and those remain today in obtaining transformers. And we were able to recondition and reuse a transformer at considerable savings of both money and schedule. So, when we were looking at all of these projects, we looked at this one. Now, something interesting did happen early on in this project. Again, I had not prioritized this. I did recognize some of the regulatory and policy advantages of Massachusetts, and I live in Massachusetts. So, but we received a letter from the Berkshire Environmental Action Team from a woman that some of you may know, Rosemary Wessel, and Rose said, we'd like to work with you to help you understand some of the needs of the community and some of the public policy benefits associated with this, and help you transition the site to clean energy. And so I called Rose very early on in our efforts to do this. And I've worked with Rose and her colleague, Jane Wynn, and they've been a great collaborative partner in this. And I've certainly learned a lot from them. And I think that they've also honestly learned a lot from us and the complexities of project development. As an independent power producer, all our facilities are reliant on the wholesale electric market products. So that's if the revenue doesn't come from energy, capacity, or ancillary services, we can't capture that. And you know, the benefits that my predecessors on the panel have talked about, I agree with wholeheartedly, but I have to monetize those and capture those, and then demonstrate to our lenders that those are that's a durable revenue stream that's not going to change over time. And so that's been a learning curve for us internally as a company, excuse me, and then also too for our investors. And you know, I'll go into, you know, how we developed the model surrounding this project from a financial perspective, but things really did start to fall into place, and this has been a really good project. Okay. So this is the site as it exists today. Without that, the space that can be converted to a battery energy storage system is in the parking lot there. And you know, when we look at the other infrastructure that's there, there's a water retention pond, there is some other tanks, and there's some other infrastructure that can be removed. There's about 35 acres all told. The first phase of the project, and I say, you know, first phase, as I've said publicly before, what we're proposing is a 45 megawatt, 4-hour, 180 megawatt hour facility. And that's really underutilizing this particular site. But there was concern amongst our investors that we would be able to capture the revenue adequately to get something like this financed. So we were very purposeful and sequential in the development process. We conducted a study of the transmission system to ensure that we could charge and discharge. And the study came back positively that we could. There were some questions about some areas of the grid, so we were very conservative in proposing 45 megawatts. Now we're confident at this time that we can add to this facility, and we are in the process of designing a phase 2, which will be likely an additional 105 megawatts. But what we anticipate right now is 60 battery containers and 15 electrical inverters. So others talked about this, so I won't linger on this, but I do want to say the project thesis behind this was the Clean Peak standard. And when we model this, and we've modeled the revenue from this from a couple of ways. We have a commercial desk in Princeton, New Jersey, and we dispatch both thermal and renewable, mostly wind facilities through that. And so they have a lot of experience in dispatching resources. But the Clean Peak standard, let me just back up to say definitively, but for the Clean Peak standard, we would not be developing this project. The Clean Peak standard makes up about 40% of the revenue that's associated with this facility. And that depends somewhat upon the forward energy curves. There, you know, obviously the capacity reforms are going to change the revenue stream associated with capacity. But the Clean Peak standard really is the basis for this project. And the project, excuse me, has become a bit of a proof of concept for us, if you will. What we wanted to demonstrate throughout our fleet and to other states is that we could leverage existing resources to get to market quicker and more cost effectively while repurposing a site. And so we have done that, and we go out to the other states. Actually, a lot of the other states come to us. We get a tremendous amount of interest from this, and we have states coming saying, we would like you to do this in our state. This is 45 megawatts. We have a total of 550 megawatts in the queue. This is the only project today that is economically viable with the existing revenue streams. And that, again, is because of the Clean Peak Standard. But this proof of concept projects gives us the ability to go to those other states that want resources like this and say, you know, we understand, of course, the benefits you're looking for, right? You're trying to shift the load profile and reduce carbon emissions. We need to capture and monetize those benefits, and the Clean Peak Standard is the way to do that. And so we have been successful in working with regulators in other states to propose regulations that are largely based upon standard. So the schedule of the project, we filed the interconnection request in June of 2022. And that was a long process, and that no fault of anybody. There was a learning curve for us from an engineering perspective. Even the vendors, particularly the inverter vendors, they had to provide some very detailed modeling specific to their equipment. So we got the system impact study back in February of this year, and I expect we'll have a fully executed interconnection agreement within the next probably couple to few weeks, probably more like a couple of weeks. And there's been a lot, we've just really been waiting on that process. So it was a detailed process, recognizing some of the challenges that other regions have had with inverter-based resources. It was necessary for them and for us to take a lot of time to study it. But that process is largely complete and has been successful. And now we will proceed to permitting the project. We've already worked fairly extensively with different vendors on pricing. Once we are permitted, from the time we tell our equipment vendors that we're ready to go, we can have the equipment on site in about 8 months, and likely take about another 3 months to commission. So we anticipate that we'll be commercial sometime mid-2024. So just a couple, I want to run through this fast just in recognition of the time. We've already talked about, you know, for us looking at all of these states and all of these markets, storage is not economically viable based upon the volatility that exists today. We do think that that's going to change. Obviously, with electrification, we're going to see larger swings in load. I just noticed in the recent markets report that what they affectionately refer to as the duck curve is starting to become more pronounced, because we're starting to see greater contributions of solar during the day. So you know, we do think that will change, but right now, again, you know, we're going to be relying on the Clean Peak Standard. Peaking resources have low capacity factors and underutilized injection rights. There are changes that are going on in all of the RTOs to allow hybrid interconnections and co-locating of resources, and that's very beneficial. And we're pursuing those and advocating for those. I think collectively, for the benefit of all of the stakeholders, it would be beneficial. You know, a lot of my focus has been on the interconnection rights, because when we don't maximize the value of our injection rights, what happens is we tend to get, I think, existing thermal generation that is underutilized, but doesn't have the incentive to leave the market. And you know, I know just the way things are changing in the, you know, demand and supply, that all of the RTOs, I still New England and PJM, are looking at this. And then finally, I think assistance from state brownfield provisions on mitigating some of the site conditions would be beneficial. You know, I was just this week speaking with some investors in regards to purchasing closed coal facilities, but there are concerns about the existing site conditions and not wanting to take on any unknown liability, and obviously the result of that is, you know, inaction, and not to the benefit of anybody. So so that's it. I can take questions or.
Great. Well, thank you, Chris. Let's bring everybody back up on screen if we can. Turn your cameras on. We have lots of questions. We have another 10 minutes or so in which to try to get to them as best we can. So let's see what we can do. Tom, I think this one's going to be for you. How is the state doing in terms of complying with the 1,000 megawatts by 2025 requirement?
Yeah, we had that in the previous webinar, but I think we just kind of got the latest target numbers in February. If I'm recalling off the top of my head, I think we're at about 566, a little over, you know, 500. So, you know, yeah, we still have definitely a ways to go until, you know, the end of 2025. But it sounds like, you know, there's some projects very much in the offing and in the queue that we're hoping we will hit that target.
Great. And sort of follow up, somebody says, did I catch the current number of energy storage projects correctly in the CPS? There are only about 62. What is your reaction to that number?
Yeah, I'd have to look back, but yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. You know, I think it, you know, it kind of goes like, you know, a trend that we've just been hearing of, you know, just from a lot of developers, is that, you know, there's uncertainties kind of within Clean Peak in terms of how the prices are gonna, you know, Clean Peak energy certificate prices are gonna evolve over time, and that can make it challenging for, you know, these projects to attract finance, because, you know, the folks trying to underwrite these projects tend to just be very risk averse when they and just aren't sure how the prices are gonna go. So the deployments we've been seeing to date have more been driven by smart, but, you know, the feedback that we've gotten, you know, we want Clean Peak to have more, you know, resources like Chris's, you know, like enrolling and, you know, and seeing, you know, this is like a bankable revenue stream. So, you know, the changes that we plan to be making in 2024 are only going to, you know, be aimed to, you know, make this a more bankable program.
Great. Somebody is asking about utility charges. So I don't know who exactly is going to be able to address this, but the question is, we find that Eversource charges more for putting our clean energy back into our home. Do we therefore need on-site storage to avoid these additional losses and direct costs for delivery? I'm not sure what that's referring to, because I'm not in Eversource territory and I don't know what those charges are that they're referring to. Does anybody know?
Could it be that
you're muted?
Could it be that they're not paying full value of what they're, in other words, the solar that goes back on the system in a net metering scenario is paid less than what they're being charged for the kilowatt hour. So therefore, if they had on-site battery storage, they'd get greater benefit.
Well, yeah, a lot of and I don't know what the tariffs are for Eversource residential customers on this. A lot of times utilities will credit a wholesale rate rather than a retail rate for net metered power that's being sold back onto the grid, in which case you're better off using it yourself rather than selling it and then buying it back at a higher rate. But I'm not sure. We should probably move on. But that's I mean, that makes sense. That would be a good guess as to what this question is about. And then you'd have to then do a calculation and try to figure out whether you're going to save enough that way to make it reasonable, economically to invest in a battery, which nobody can answer for you. You have to figure that out. But okay, let's go to another question here. Tom, can you provide a link to the website showing which transmission areas are stressed? That information would be nice to have in map format.
Transmission. Are you, maybe they're referring to the distribution circuit multiplier?
I'm
That's my
guessing it's
guess.
the distribution again. Yeah.
Yeah. Like it's a great suggestion. It's something that we can try to work on. It would be nice to be able to, I guess, to see that. I mean, you can kind of see. You can't see the circuits that are DC distribution circuit multiplier eligible on the electric distribution companies hosting capacity maps, but you can, at least if you go on, National Grid, Eversource, Unitil's websites, and find their hosting capacity maps, you can kind of get a sense for, different circuits and like how highly loaded they are.
Okay. Can someone explain alternative compliance payments?
I guess that would be me. So alternative compliance payments, these are essentially payments that are made in lieu, at least in the Clean Peak program, and we have this in our other programs as well. A payment that's made in lieu of an actual generator certificate. So the compliance obligation remains no matter what. So if there's not enough certificates out in the market, alternative compliance payments must be made. And it's essentially what it ends up doing is it kind of puts a price ceiling on how much a certificate is worth. Because say a certificate were generated, and it costs $50, but the ACP was $45, the utility company could always buy an ACP certificate and forego the CPEC, the $50 CPEC certificate. So it puts essentially a price on what a certificate will cost. And in a case where we're in today, where the market is very much undersupplied, there's not a lot of CPECs out on the market. Certificates that are on the market essentially trade pretty close to the ACP level, and then that remaining obligation has to be met through ACP payments. So essentially, the program ends up costing a lot, because of that, versus a more robust market where you have like lots of certificates and you have a supply demand that can drive the price down. So, we're hoping again that the changes that, we can try to bring forth in Clean Peak will kind of drive more deployment and participation in CPS.
Thanks. It might be helpful to just point out that the Clean Peak concept is sort of just an extension of the renewable portfolio standard kind of model that a lot of states, most states have by now adopted, wherein the state says, we want to have X amount of the electricity be from renewable sources by X date, and then the utilities are tasked to procure that. And so generally there's, and not always, but often, there is an ACP. So in other words, if the utility is responsible for 100 megawatts of clean power by this year, and they're only able to procure 80, then for the other 20, they could either buy credits from somebody who has excess credits, or they could pay the alternative compliance payment for those 20. And then often the state agencies will use that money to fund some sort of renewable incentive program or something else along those lines. So that's just kind of a general, it's very general. It doesn't always work that way, but that's sort of the general model for an ACP. Okay, so somebody is asking about ISO New England's resource capacity accreditation project, which is going to require a little explanation. The question is that this project is projected to reduce the capacity revenues of battery storage resources. I'm assuming what they're referring to is that New England may be going to a different accreditation method, that ELCC method rather than qualifying capacity. And the question is, what impact will this have on storage in Massachusetts, and will the state need to consider additional revenue streams to counteract a potential loss of money for those projects?
it will reduce the wholesale market revenue available from the capacity market. And I want to say it's a fairly significant derate. The metric that they're using is the effective load carrying capability. So it's actually a resource, is certainly not limited to storage, ability to serve load in any particular time. And so we will experience a fairly significant reduction in capacity revenue, which we would need to have that made up somewhere. It is probably the least amount of our revenue. It was never a great capacity, never a great revenue source.
Thank you. So I just want to add, because we just did a study on battery storage for peaker plant replacement in Maine. And one of the aspects of that was looking at this possible move to an ELCC model, which, if you're going to be selling into the capacity market and you're going to be using battery storage to do it, right now New England credits full nameplate capacity if you have a 2-hour resource. So you can have a 2-hour battery that's getting full credit in the capacity market right now in New England. Under an ELCC model, that would be pretty steeply derated. So you'd really probably want to have at least a 4-hour battery or even longer duration. So what it's going to do in general, I think, is push battery developers toward longer duration storage if they're going to be playing in the capacity market, and some aren't, so they won't care. But for those that are, it would mean that longer duration will not get derated as drastically. But it's a complicated thing, and down the line.
Yeah, that is a complicated thing. We really looked at we weighed the duration, the benefits, and obviously that 2 hours was the threshold for capacity revenue. We were very mindful of that. But the cost of going to a longer term probably would not be uneconomic, or would not be economic for this project. And then we would have some concerns about the maturity of the available technology.
Sure. I will note that I think New England's the only ISO and RTO region that has a 2-hour standard. All the others have 4. PJM's already gone to ELCC, I believe, recently. So in any case, I think we have exceeded our time by a couple of minutes, and I'm sorry that we didn't get to all the questions, but we did get to a good number of them. Thank you so much to all the presenters. I think this has been really informative. For those of you who, again, you want to review this or get the slides, or you missed the first webinar in the series, you can go to our webinar archive and find this. It should be posted within a day or so into the archive. So thanks again, everybody. Hope you'll come back and join us for webinars 3 and 4 in the series. And I'll turn it back over to Zareen for any further announcements about other upcoming events. And take care.
Thank you, everyone, for joining the webinar. If you'd like to see any upcoming webinars or our archived webinars, just go to cleanegroup.org/webinars. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great day.